In this recording, we are again going to look at the autarky setup. We're going to look at when there is no trade which is happening. Then how does it autarky equilibrium comes up? And in this recording, we are going to derive the relative demand and the relative supply curves of one particular country when there is no trade. Later on, we're going to add the another country and then introduce trade in this model. So there is one country, a home country. It can produce cheese, it can produce wine. And it is using just one factor of production, which is labor, under perfect competitions, right? So we can define the unit labor requirements. So amount of labor which is required to make 1 unit of cheese. Amount of labor which is required to make 1 unit of cheese is, let's say, ALC, right? ALC, right? For 1 unit of cheese, you require ALC amount of labor. For 1 unit of wine, you require ALW amount of labor, right? And you want to produce how many units of cheese? QC. You want to produce how many units of wine? QW. So how much of labor is going to be required to produce cheese? That is ALC QC. How much of labor is going to be required to produce QW units of wine? ALW QLW. With this, you can actually move on to define what is the production possibility frontier. So production possibility frontier is just characterizing what is the maximum amount of cheese and wine you can produce, given whatever your technology is and given whatever resources you have. Well, you will define the full employment condition. Full employment condition is that the total labor is the labor used in the cheese industry and the wine industry. So the total labor get exhausted in the production of cheese and wine, right? But you have already seen that LC is equal to ALC into QC. LW is equal to ALW into QW. That is what L is. So I can write everything in terms of QW. That is AW QW equals to L minus ALC QC. So QW is L upon AW minus ALC upon AW QC minus ALC upon ALW QC. So how many units of wine you have to give up in order to get 1 more unit of cheese? This is the slope of the production possibility frontier. So I'm not again going into the detail because you have already derived the production possibility frontier earlier too. But the way Krugman has defined this, so I'm using that particular model out here. So you need to give up these many units of wine in order to get 1 more unit of cheese, right? So you can say that the economy needs to give up ALC upon ALW units of wine to produce an additional unit of cheese. To produce an additional unit of cheese, right? So basically what this ALC upon ALW is, this is the opportunity cost of cheese in terms of wine. So how many units of wine you have to give up in order to get one more unit of cheese. So that's an opportunity cost of cheese in terms of wine. So the opportunity cost is basically the second best use. So if you are using resources for wine, but you could have also used these resources in order for the production of cheese. So how many units of wine you need to give up in order to get one more unit of cheese? That's what an idea is. And if you just want to plot this guy, or QW is equal to this thing. So if QC is 0, QW is L upon AW. And if QW is 0, if QW is 0, then QC is L upon ALC. L upon ALC. And you can join them by line segment, and this is what my PPF is. And the slope of this line segment is what? Intercept on the y-axis upon intercept on the x-axis. So that is your ALC upon ALW. You can also write it like minus. We generally talk in terms of that we know that this is going to be minus. This is going to be downward sloping. Okay, now we're going to introduce prices and wages into the model. And we're going to assume that wages are going to adjust to ensure the full employment, right? So all labor should be exhausted in the production of cheese and wine. So the moment you say that wages are adjusting to ensure full employment, so full employment would mean that you are producing on PPF. So it's not that any unit of labor is unemployed. So it is producing either cheese or wine, right? And but you still need to determine that where on this PPF. So yes, by ensuring that there is full employment, you are saying that yes, you are going to produce on the PPF, but where? Where on this PPF you're going to produce? You're going to produce here, where? So we don't know. So that is what we need to find out. So the moment we find out that where the economy is going to produce on this PPF, it means that we will be able to determine what is the allocation of labor in the two industries, right? So if, let's say, for example, I'm going to produce here, let's say, so there is a huge amount of labor which is going in the cheese industry, and very less amount of labor of the economy is going to the wine industry. So every point is going to determine the allocation of labor in the two industry, right? And of course, we are going to assume that the workers are fully mobile across the industry. So they will be going to the industry which is giving them the highest wage. So if the cheese industry is going to give them the highest wage, they will go to that industry. If wine industry is giving them the highest wage, they'll go to that industry. So please write this. We assume that workers are fully mobile between industries, right? And they will be working in the industry which is going to give them the higher wage. That is, if the cheese industry is going to give them the higher wage, they'll move towards the cheese industry. If this guy, your wine industry is going to give them the higher wage, they will be going towards that industry. So what is the break-even condition? The break-even condition is that the price which the cheese industry is going to charge from its customer is equal to the cost. Cost is what? Cost is cost of the labor, because labor is the only factor of production which they are using, right? So the break-even condition break-even condition. So PC is the amount which they are charging for 1 unit of cheese, right, from their customers. Then WC is the amount of the wage which they are giving to the worker of the cheese industry into ALC, right? ALC is the unit, how many units of, how much of labor is required to produce a unit of cheese. That's what you have said out here, the amount of labor required to produce a unit of cheese. So for 1 unit of cheese, you're going to charge PC. How much of labor is required to produce 1 unit of cheese? ALC. And for each unit of labor, you have to give WC as the wage. So this is the total cost. This is the cost. This is what your revenue is. I don't want to say revenue because, okay, let's say if you write it like this, 1 into PC, then it is like this. But just think in your head like that. So when PC is equal to WC into ALC, that is when the price is equal to the average costs out here. Similarly, the break-even condition in the wine industry is for 1 unit of wine, they are charging PW from their customers. In order to produce 1 unit of wine, they are using ALW amount of labor. And for each labor, they are giving WW as the wage in the wine industry. So this is what my break-even conditions are. This is what my break-even conditions would be in the cheese industry and in the wine industry. Just remember them. They're going to be useful for us. This is what my break-even conditions are in the cheese industry and in the wine industry. Fair enough. And how do you get the relative supply curve? If you look at the home industry, the relative supply curve is going to determine how, what is supply curve? Supply curve is telling you at different price levels, how much you're going to supply. Relative supply curve would be at the different relative price of cheese. What is the relative quantity of cheese which you will be supplying? Relative to what? Relative to wine? Relative to what? Relative to wine. So relative at the different relative price of cheese, what is the relative supply of cheese? That is what you need to find out in this, right? Okay. So we are going to construct the relative supply curve in the autarky equilibrium according to one logic, that workers are going to work in that industry which is going to give them the highest wage. That is what it is, right? So a relative supply curve can be constructed by determining which industry can afford to pay them the highest wage, right? For any given relative price of cheese. for any given relative price of cheese. Okay. Achha, can you just think of your supply conditions? Sorry, your break-even conditions. What was that? PW is ALW WW. PC is ALC WC, right? Or WW is PW upon ALW. WC is PC upon ALC. Let's write case 1. If WC is less than WW, then in that case, PC upon ALC is less than PW upon ALW. PC upon ALC is less than PW upon ALW. You can also write this as PC upon PW is less than ALC upon ALW. I can write like this. PC upon PW is less than ALC upon ALW. But ALC upon ALW, it could be written as this is equivalent to your QC upon QW. This guy is equivalent to QC upon QW. Your ALC upon ALW, it is equivalent to your QC upon QW, right? So this is nothing but the relative price of cheese. This is nothing but the relative supply of cheese, or relative supply of cheese, or you can say opportunity cost of cheese. This is the opportunity cost of cheese, right? Well, if relative price of cheese is less than the opportunity cost of cheese, it is not beneficial for you to produce cheese. You should be producing only wine. So the price, I mean, in very simple term, the price which you're getting for cheese is less than the cost of producing it. Why will you produce this? So economy produces only wine. Economy produces only wine, and it does not produce this guy. So ALC by ALW, I mean, you can think in terms of 1 unit. Now QC by QW, you can think in terms of QC by QW units, the total amount of cheese and total amount of wine which you are going to produce, right? That is what case 1 is. So just keep this in your head. That is what case 1 is. Case 2. If WC is going to be greater than WW, then that would mean PC by ALC is greater than PW by ALW. That would mean PC by PW greater than ALC by ALW. That is equivalent to QC by QW. Now think about it. The relative price of cheese is greater than the opportunity cost of cheese. So you're making money, no, in producing cheese. So you will be producing only cheese in this case. Economy produces only cheese out here. Economy produces only cheese out here. Then case 3. WC is equal to WW. That would mean PC by PW is equal to, or you can also write it as PC by ALC is equal to PW by ALW. That is PC by PW equals to ALC by ALW. That is equivalent to QC by QW. So how much of cheese here? How much of cheese you can produce? Infinity. You'll be producing just cheese. Here, I mean, you can produce anything. I mean, you may produce, because you're indifferent producing cheese and wine. So you can produce anything from 0 to infinity. Here, how much of cheese you'll be producing? Just 0. So here you will be producing both cheese and wine. Economy may produce both cheese and wine, right? So you have what? You have QC by QW on the x-axis. You have PC by PW on the y-axis. And you have ALC by ALW here, right? Well, if PC by PW is less than ALC by ALW, how much of QC by QW you'll be producing? 0. No, here. If PC by PW is less than ALC by ALW, how much of this thing you'll be producing? This one. If ALC by ALW is equal to PC by PW, you can produce anything. Will be indifferent. You can produce whatever you want to produce. And then here, if PC by PW is greater, this part is PC by PW greater than ALC by ALW. So in this case, you'll be producing only cheese. So this case is what? PC by PW greater than ALC by ALW. Only cheese. This case is what? PC by PW less than ALC by ALW. Only wine. And this case is what? PC by PW equals to ALC by ALW. Right? You can produce both cheese and wine, whatever you want to produce. You can produce both cheese and wine. Right? And then you have to complete the model by writing out the relative demand curve. So as relative supply curve is showing at different relative cheese price, PC by PW, how much is the relative supply of cheese? That is QC by QW. Relative demand is showing that how much is going to be the relative demand for cheese QC by QW when PC by PW is going to change, right? So we will be assuming that it is a downward sloping curve. That is what we're going to assume. You have QC by QW. You have PC by PW. So as the relative price is going to go up, the relative demand for cheese is going to fall. Relative price is going to go up, relative demand for cheese is going to fall. So I can superimpose this here. Autarky equilibrium, I can actually superimpose this here for something like this. So you have the relative supply curve and you have the relative demand curve. Relative supply curve and relative demand curve. So let's say it is intersecting at this part. Let us say it is intersecting at this part, and then in that case, I'm actually producing both. I'm actually producing both. And I'm writing this as QCA by QWA. And this seems reasonable also. Why? Because when you are not trading, you should be actually producing both of them. I mean, you can't depend upon the other country to produce something for you, and you can trade that with what you are producing. So it is reasonable enough to assume that it is going to intersect at this part, right? So the equilibrium relative price of cheese is going to be equal to, and A is for the autarky. So this is the equilibrium relative price of cheese, which is equal to the opportunity cost of cheese. Is equal to the opportunity cost of cheese in autarky. So the prices, they also have to ensure that the wages are equal in both the industries, right? So the moment I have QC by QA, QC by QA, I can read QC by QA in this diagram. So the moment I have QC by QA here, I can actually read this QC by QA here. No. That is this much of QC will be produced in autarky, and this much of QW is going to be produced in autarky. So the slope is going to be in autarky equilibrium. It is going to be your QWA by QCA for this. So this is about the autarky equilibrium. We have not introduced the another country into this, and we will again be deriving the relative supply curve in trade when there will be two countries, when you have both the foreign as well as home country. But this is just the autarky equilibrium. Thank you, Beta.